Malaysia. Welcome to the consultation on the cooperative identity, perspectives from the Asia Pacific region. This is the third consultation we are having. The first was with members in the Philippines and the second with members in Iran. And today we are having with the ACO member countries. Given the scope of the Asia Pacific region, we felt that it would be good to have consultations country-wise where we have many members or a sub-region. And in the ACO sub-region, specifically the ASEAN countries, we have members who are both part of ACO and ICA and who are in one or the other. So it's a diverse group that we have from the Asia Pacific region. And I'm glad to see, in addition to our members in Malaysia, we have Singapore on the call. Patsy is there. And even Santosh from the global office has joined. I'm not sure if any other of the ACO members are there, but we can find that out later. So thank you and welcome everyone. In 2020, the ICA celebrated its 125th anniversary and the 25th anniversary of the Statement of Cooperative Identity. Given the pandemic and the lockdown and restrictions, the celebrations which were planned in 2020 could not take place. And the ICA now plans to celebrate the World Congress in 2021 in November, December, with the theme Deepening the Cooperative Identity. And we do hope that the situation will improve with vaccinations increasing in countries. And the cases, again, it's been a very mixed bag. Some countries it's going up, some it's coming down. But we hope that over the next 6-7 months, things will improve and we'll be able to meet many of you in person in Seoul. So the deepening the cooperative identity, the theme for the Congress, and the hope is that there'll be reflection on how the cooperative identity guides day-to-day operations, the practical challenges that cooperatives face, and the strategies which are in place to overcome them. And the cooperative identity applies to all forms of cooperative. It's not just cooperatives at the primary level, but also at the secondary or union level, the national federations, academic institutions, universities, other stakeholders involved, and other forms of organizations, hybrid organizations which are coming up, who espouse on the cooperative values and principles. So it applies to a diversity of organizations. So that's one. So how does it guide our day-to-day operation? How does the cooperative identity, how can it be used to evaluate cooperatives with other forms of enterprises? We are apart from others in terms of our member base, our value base, the principles on which we work, and how the ownership and how members benefit varies when compared to a business enterprises. And given the situation these days post-pandemic, with there is increased competition. There is, in addition to increased competition, there is also new forms, the acceleration of technology, new issues which have come up. So how do we evaluate cooperatives in comparison to the other businesses? What is our strength? What is our weakness? How do we overcome that? The identity will also, the Congress will also look at how do we enhance cooperatives as member-based enterprises. How do we enhance member interest? How do we increase the responsibilities? How do we enhance cooperation among cooperatives while we compete? We compete with players in the market. Do we need to really compete amongst ourselves also, or how can we cooperate so that together we can compete with others? I think that's one issue which came about in the consultations with the Philippines and in Iran, that we team to compete not only with the private players, but also are competing with each other. Is that something in line with the cooperation among cooperatives? how is it that we can cooperate and compete? Both can be done, but how do we do that? And finally, what is the relationship with governments and stakeholders? In the Asia Pacific region, in many countries, cooperatives are uh, historically were supported by governments. Many continue to be supported, but there are also other forms of cooperatives come up. But then, irrespective of the form, the relationship with the government matters. It can either be improved or it can hinder our work. And then, of course, there are many other stakeholders who are also interested in cooperatives, and especially given the sustainable development goals and the role that cooperatives can play. There needs to be a lot of engagement with the other stakeholders. So how do we, I think, end of the day, how do we deepen our cooperative identity, looking at all these particular issues? And the reason why we are doing these consultations at a country level or at a sub-regional level is to get input, to hear what members, what you all have to say on these different issues. And what we hope is to put all these together and present it to the Congress as views from the Asia Pacific region. Of course, during the Congress, there'll be other avenues. There are panels being formed, and there'll be many discussions which will take place. There'll be opportunity for us to engage. But we feel that given that the consultation, that the Congress is going to happen in the Asia Pacific region, that it will be good to consult members and provide their view. And so it's in that light that we are having these consultations. And I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. We are also delighted to have two experienced individuals to advise us, to guide us and to facilitate us. One is Ms. Om Devi Malla, who's the ICA Global Board member from the region. And she's also on the Congress Advisory Committee. So she is well positioned also to take the views from the Asia Pacific region to the Congress committee as they formulate the details of the Congress. Ms. Om Devi Malla is also the Vice Chair of the National Cooperative Federation of Nepal and a member of the Legislative Parliament in Nepal. So she has very rich experience with cooperatives and will be able to one guide and provide input. But I must say, yesterday I received an email from her. She is unfortunately down with tonsillitis and has lost a voice momentarily, not in a true sense. But so she's unable to join this consultation today. But she has prepared a presentation. She has shared it with us. So I will present the PowerPoint which she has prepared, which lays out the perspective that she has to provide from a global sense, global board, global ICA sense, which I'll present. And if there are questions, I told her that if there are questions on a presentation, we will reach back to her and get her input and share it with you all. And so in that sense, she conveys her regret she's not able to join, but her presentation, I will make her presentation. The second advisor we have is Professor Akira Kurimoto. And Professor Kurimoto needs no introduction. Many of you all, I think most of you all know him. He is currently the chair of the ICAP Research Committee. He is a professor of the Cooperative Program at the Institute for Solidarity-Based Society at Hosei University in Tokyo, Japan. Professor Kurimoto has also been part of the ICA Principals Committee, and the Principals Committee in 2015 came out with the guidance note on the cooperative principles. So he is very well versed in terms of the discussions that have taken place on the principles and how it has evolved. And so we are very grateful that he is able to join us today. So these are the two experts, and then the format of this today's consultation would be that we will have a quick round of introduction. I see quite a few of us are here. Maybe you can just state your name and organization, We'll do a quick round of introduction. Then we'll have the two presentations. I'll request Professor Kurimoto to first give his presentation, and then I will present Ms. Om Devi Malla's presentation. After that, we will get into the round of discussions, and ahead of the meeting, we have circulated broad 5 questions. So we can have a discussion around that in terms of hearing viewpoints. And of course, it's not just limited to 5 questions. If you all have other input, other points to share, then feel free to share it with us. So I'll take a pause here. Welcome everyone. And maybe we can have a quick round of introduction. I leave it open. Anyone can step in and then just briefly introduce and which organization you are representing today. If you can have a quick round.
Maybe I go first.
Sure.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, my name is Patsy. I represent Singapore National Cooperative Federation. We are the apex body for all the cooperatives in Singapore. Thanks.
Hi. My name is Datuk Shukri from Akasa, Malaysia. Together with my bosses, Dr. Fatah there. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Walu.
Hello.
And the rest of the representative from Co-op all around Asia Pacific. From Malaysia, from Angkasa in particular, because we have other Co-op, Datuk Sahadewan from National Finance, also some delegates from Institute of Cooperative Malaysia. I think they will introduce themselves. So on behalf of Angkasa, I would like to introduce myself. As you know, Nasir, the CEO. On my right is President of Angkasa, Datuk Fatah. And further right is Dr. Azlan, also Vice President of Angkasa. And Dr. Rahman is also online on his own, not in this meeting room. I think he also will introduce himself. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. And nice to see you all.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Dr. Abdul Rahman, ex-DG of the Cooperative Institute, and now I'm in the board in Angkasa, the APEC Cooperative.
Hello. Good morning and good evening, everyone. My name is Muhammad Zaid from Cooperative College of Malaysia. With me, Madam Sharina from Strategy and Policy Department, also Madam Zarina Tun from International and Collaboration Center, and also Mr. Christopher from the Central Zone. Hopefully we can contribute more for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. Anyone else? I think I see Dato Sahadevan there. You have to unmute. You're on mute. Dato Sahadevan, you are on mute. We are not able to hear you.
Yes, sorry. This is a technical glitch. Please carry on. I'm Sahadevan from National and Finance. We are also members of Angkasa. You could hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you. Thank you for joining
Thank
us.
you, and thanks for the invitation. Thank you, Mr. Baluaya. Thank you. Bye. Carry on.
Is there anyone else who would like to, was not introduced? Okay. From the ICAP, we are also in the conference room. You're only seeing my face, but there are others in the conference room. My colleagues, Shri Padmanabhan, Mohit Dave, Simran Singh and Shivali Sarna are here in the conference room. And I think Savitri Singh is online. So there's a good representation from the ICAP here. And I see that Dato Kamaruddin Ismail also.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon
Welcome.
in Malaysia. Good afternoon. Okay. Thank you, Balu. All right.
Yeah. So my welcome again to everyone. Savitri is waving a hand. So let's get started. I'd like to request Professor Kurimoto to first make his presentation, following which I will make mine, and then we can get into a round of discussion. Professor Kurimoto.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I shall share
Sorry,
my slides.
before you, just apologies, just a couple of points. One, can I request those who are not speaking to keep their mics on mute so that there is no disturbance. And two is we will be recording this call more for us, because when we need to transcribe, we need the record. So more in that line, we will be recording the conversation. So yes, Professor Kurimoto, the floor is yours.
Okay. So now I just shared my slides, and I shall start the slideshow. Okay, can you hear me? It's a privilege
we can hear
for
you.
me. Yes, it's a great pleasure and privilege for me to speak before our Malaysian friends, because Malaysia was the first country which I have visited nearly 50 years ago to take part in the ICA's conference on consumer cooperation in 1974, so nearly 50 years ago. So I shall discuss about the deepening cooperative identity from the Asia-Pacific perspective, why cooperative identity matters now. Sorry, I shall make it smaller. Yes, we witness the growing inequality, political and social divides, while we are threatened by the consequences of climate change and rampant pandemics. To succeed overcoming these challenges, we desperately need the cooperation and solidarity among people. In such a difficult time, we have to address such global issues, relying on our basics, namely cooperative identity, crystallized in the ICA statement on cooperative identity, agreed as the greatest common factor among worldwide cooperators in 1995. The ICA statement was introduced in the UN Cooperative Guidelines and the ILO Recommendations 193 on promotion of cooperatives. And the ICA Principal Committee published the guidance notes of cooperative principles in 2015, as Balu had introduced, to help understanding and practicing the principles. So now I shall touch upon very briefly 150 years journey from Rochdale to Manchester. Rochdale society's rule gradually evolved to principles since 1844, and Rochdale principles was enshrined in a rule book of Rochdale Pioneer Society from 1860. And the ICA's first cooperative principle was formulated in 1937, and second configuration of principles took place in 1966, and ILO Recommendation 127 in 1966, and approval of the ICA identity statement at 1995 ICA Congress in Manchester that contains the definition of a cooperative, its values and principles that are universal in its essence. From Ledrow's report in 1980 to the adoption of ICA identity statement, I shall skip it because this is shared by all of you. But I have to touch upon the characteristics of the Asia-Pacific cooperatives. Asia-Pacific region has a vast diversity of the political legal system, economic system, level of development, culture, and religion. Such a diversity makes regional political and economic integration very difficult in comparison with North America or Europe. Asia-Pacific cooperatives operate under such circumstances. Asian cooperatives are characterized by the dominant state roles in regulation and promotion, while the Pacific cooperatives face strong competition with the for-profit sector. The British Empire introduced the Cooperative Credit Societies Act of India with strong government control in 1904 that became a prototype of cooperative legislation in most of the colonized countries. Even after the independence, such top-down tradition was inherited since national leaders had seen cooperatives as an engine of national development. The ICA Pacific has convened the biennial Cooperative Ministers Conference since 1990, aiming to strengthen the cooperative autonomy and independence based on the constructive partnership between the government and the cooperatives. But the progress has been very slow at this moment. So how to deepen the cooperative identity from the Asia-Pacific perspectives? For the first principle, voluntary and open membership addresses no discrimination by political, religious reasons or gender. In the Asian context, the participation of women and youth is mostly relevant since male and senior leaders are prevalent in cooperatives, reflecting on the embedded dominant culture. There are cooperatives exclusively composed of women in India, Iran, Malaysia, etc., to avoid gender discrimination, while women occupy a majority of membership and board members in consumer cooperation in Japan and South Korea. The youth is also underrepresented group, while the lack of youth participation may endanger the sustainability of cooperatives. So this participation of women and youth are the most relevant problem which the Asia-Pacific cooperatives are facing. The second principle, the democratic control is concerned with the internal governance of cooperative. Recently, we witnessed the failure of governance leading to the serious setback of cooperatives. We can see the British case of cooperative group. Under cooperative group, the cooperative bank had already almost bankrupted and now saved by the global capitalism. And in Spain, the Mondragon Cooperatives, flagship producer cooperative that was operating not only in Europe but also in Asia, had bankrupted. So there are many failures. So we have elaborated the guidance notes to the cooperative principles that exhibit guidelines for a wide range of governance issues to cope with governance failures, which the Japanese consumers cooperatives had faced in the late 1990s. the Japanese Consumers Cooperative Union published the guidelines for sound governance in 1999. The third principle, member economic participation, deals with members' obligation in strengthening the capital base of their cooperative. A cooperative has inherent difficulty in raising capital because of limited return on investment and equal voting rights, irrespective of the share capital. Some cooperatives in Australia and New Zealand in this region were demutualized, but it is not so popular in most of the Asian countries. So demutualization took place mostly in the Anglo-Saxon countries and some European and American countries, but not in Asia. In Japan, agricultural cooperatives run the world-class bank, but huge amount of farmers' deposit is not effectively utilized. So they are facing the problem of over-capitalization, while the consumer cooperatives, which is not allowed to do the banking business, but they build up members' share through monthly installment. So now you cannot imagine that consumer cooperative in Japan has the average share capital per member of about $300 US. It's very large in comparison with the British case, where the share capital is only £1. So a huge difference we can see. So how to deal with the capital is still a great problem for many countries. How to raise capital, how to attract more investment from members. That is what we are facing every day. While in Japan, we are now struggling how to use them to modernize the agriculture, for instance. But most of the farmers are very aged, so they cannot invest so heavily because they will retire very soon. So they don't wish to invest a large amount of money to the new ventures, new equipments, etc. The fourth principle, autonomy and independence, is a principle newly added in 1995. It is especially relevant to the Asian cooperatives since the cooperatives are still by and large under the strong state control and promotion. To establish the constructive partnership based on equality, both states and cooperatives need to change their attitude. The government has to confine itself to legal supervision in accordance with the United Nations ILO guidelines, while the cooperatives has to build capacities in strategic planning and coordination by themselves so as to be more independent in policy making. Fifth principle, education, training, and information is a principle enlisted since the time of Rochdale pioneers. Member education is essential for the success of cooperatives, while manager and employee training are conducted at various levels, local and provincial level and national levels. The school university cooperatives in many Asian countries are conducive to the cooperative development in the long run. These are the strengths of the Asian cooperatives. In many countries, we have the campus cooperatives and school cooperatives. In Malaysia, you have both. And in the information age, the importance of public relations is increasingly recognized, but cooperatives tend to lag behind in utilizing state-of-the-art digital devices. So that is, we have to change and modernize. The sixth principles, cooperatives of the same kind are naturally federated at regional and national levels, while the collaboration among different kinds of cooperatives need to be facilitated. In Japan and South Korea, the direct transaction between consumers and producers, we call it sanchoku, that had been promoted by consumer and farmer fishery cooperatives to enhance understanding each other and realize mutual benefits since the 1970s. While the Japan Cooperative Alliance was set up as a think tank covering all types of cooperatives just 2 years ago. ASEAN Cooperative Organizations, ACO, needs to create tangible benefits. So in this regard, the 6 principles should be implemented more widely. Finally, 7th principles are concern for community. This is a new principle added in 1995. This is related to cooperatives' community engagement. In the Asia-Pacific region, prone to natural disasters caused by earthquakes, tsunami, and typhoons, cyclones that frequently brought formidable human and monetary losses. We can note that the cooperative responses to such calamities in both rescue phase and rehabilitation phases. We observed cooperatives' endeavors to rehabilitate victims' life in Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka, and so on, after Indian Ocean earthquake tsunami in 2004. After the Kobe earthquake in 1995 and the East Japan earthquake and tsunami in 2011, just 10 years back, the Japanese cooperatives made tremendous efforts to rescue victims and help them to rehabilitate lives. Recently, we have organized several events to commemorate this 10th anniversary of tsunami and earthquake in Japan and recall and reaffirm our engagement to support the rescue and rehabilitation of the cooperatives and people's lives. So that is still very relevant issue. So we need to find best practices of deepening cooperative identity in the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Kurimoto. Before we get to the next presentation, are there any immediate questions for Professor Kurimoto from anyone?
In my opinion, there is very much advantage for us when whole world having the pandemic of COVID-19 now, and now we are more focusing online. By one of the best way is can be making this Mr. Harimoto aspiration to be done. And we those days we normally come up with having a face-to-face meeting, but nowadays it's much easier. We utilize because before this we underutilized using online as one of our best method to make this thing can become much better.
Yes, the pandemics, we are facing serious challenges. For instance, now most of the university campuses are closed. So the university cooperatives cannot trade, cannot do the business. So they have to change their way of business by shifting to the home delivery of the goods, or many of the employees are now hired temporarily by the consumer cooperation. Consumer cooperation is now very much thriving because in Japan, 70% of consumer cooperative business is done already online, or sorry, home delivery. So last year, consumer cooperation had increased its sales by 10 to 20%, very large increase after the stagnant years of development. So in this regard, consumer cooperatives are thriving, but campus university cooperatives are struggling the effects of pandemic. And in case of agricultural cooperatives, they are also facing the challenge of lack of labor coming from Asian countries because there are shortage of workforce. So they are relying on the imported labor from neighboring countries like China, Korea, Vietnam, etc., Bangladesh. But now those people cannot come to Japan. So agricultural cooperatives are facing serious problem of lack of workforce. But they are now making efforts to rely on the local people to help them to the farm activities like harvesting, etc. And banking and insurance cooperatives are also doing their best to ensure that they can continue their service to the consumer members, to the members, customers. And workers' cooperatives are also very active in providing job opportunities to those who have lost their jobs because of pandemics. So in this regard, the cooperatives are doing very good jobs to cope with the bad effects of pandemics. So we have to continue our business operation even under such a very difficult time. Thank you for your question.
Okay, let me now present the slides which Ms. Om Devi Malla had prepared, and then after which we can open up the discussion. I'm sure there'll be much which cooperatives in Malaysia have done during the pandemic and trying to address challenges and seeing how we leverage opportunity. I think we'll get into that discussion after this PowerPoint. Okay. Again, like I said, Ms. Om Devi Malla conveys her regrets. She's been unwell, but she's very much keen to know what the discussions, the consultation that took place today, and she will be most happy to respond to any questions that you all may have. As Professor Kurimoto was presenting, I remember that this kind of a consultation is not the first time that it's happening in the Asia Pacific region. In 1995, the ICA came up with the Cooperative Statement of Identity at Manchester. Immediately after that, in 1997, there was a gathering in Jaipur in India. And it's 25 years back. Mr. Nasir Khan must have been a much younger version of himself. He was there during that meeting, and he made a presentation there. And I think there were other member organizations also who attended this consultation. More to look at, it was very new. The cooperative statement was very new, and to discuss about how this would be affected and how we can implement it in practice. So 25 years later, while the Congress is going to celebrate the deepening the cooperative identity, I think this is also a good opportunity for members in the Asia Pacific region to reflect on how things have happened over the past 25 years. In terms of background, the ICA Congress formally adopted the Rochdale Principles in 1937. So for cooperatives to operate. And these guidelines and principles have over time been evolving. When the guidelines were adopted, it was said that these principles are not cast in stone. We need to look at how things are evolving, how things are changing, and how do we make sure that these principles can be explained in the current context. For as things change, we need to also look at how do we explain this. And so the one big such meeting which took place was in 1995, where the Statement of Cooperative as a combined document, which has the definition of cooperatives, it has the values that we stand for, and the principles. Many a times we talk about, in discussions, the focus is given on the 7 principles. We talk a lot about this, but I think equally important are the definition of what a cooperative is. And for me, that's one of the issues, because the way cooperatives are viewed is different in different countries. In some countries, we are looked at as an enterprise, and part of the private sector looked at as part of a private entity, whereas in some other countries we are looked at as on the social side. So it's much more in terms of the welfare side, that you need to do good rather than try to do business on your own. But when we look at the definition of a cooperative as per the identity, it's an enterprise which combines economic, social, and environmental aspect. And so I think that's one of the things which we need to see, that how are cooperatives perceived in each of our countries, and is there something that we need to actively advocate on in how cooperatives are viewed. The other is the values. I think values also need to be strongly emphasized, as important as the definition and the principle, because it has elements of equity, it has elements of equality, self-reliance, self-help. And these are important things when we consider, in many instances, we feel that we need to depend on the government. And as Professor Kurimoto mentioned, the consumer cooperatives in Japan and in other countries are much more raise money on their own. So it's all member driven, whereas in some other countries, it's much more dependent. So how does that affect the values on which we base? So I think all the 3 elements of the definition, values, and principles becomes important. And again, Om Devi Mallaji also mentioned that the SCI is not a rigid document as rules. It's it's a document which has the basic framework, but then its interpretation can change over time. It follows as per national rules and regulations, maintaining the governance to meet the economic, social, cultural. I mentioned about environmental, but cultural needs and aspirations also become very important of members through a jointly owned enterprise. So I think this comes to the core of defining what cooperatives are, and we need to also keep this in view when we look at how cooperatives are viewed in different countries. The Statement of Cooperative Identity guides not only cooperators to operate their cooperative business, but also for organizations which promote, regulate cooperatives, the government, and with civil society with whom we partner. Cooperatives don't work in isolation. We need to work with the other players. So how are cooperatives explained to them? But when it comes to government, in many places, the governments are the promoters, the regulators, the controllers. How well is their understanding of cooperatives? And I'm sure in Malaysia, you all run into this issue in terms of certain businesses, private entities are allowed to operate, but the same business, cooperatives are not allowed to operate. So is there an issue in terms of understanding of what cooperatives are and what we are? I think this point is also very important. And the SCI is also to direct new generation of future leaders. So how do we are not just talking in the current, but also in the future, how do we use the Statement of Cooperative Identity to attract, to reach out, and bring in a new generation into the cooperative fold? What are the challenges? I think cooperatives are social businesses, but they are not immune. We operate as part of an ecosystem, so we are not immune to any effect which others have to face. And examples are the pandemic. Cooperatives across, along with all other enterprises, cooperatives were also affected. We have to deal with issues around extreme poverty, food security. Climate change is a big issue which affects cooperatives across, because in many countries, agriculture cooperatives dominate. And the first impact of climate change is felt by agriculture. So how do we address issues around climate change? How do we mitigate? How do we make ourselves more resilient? Every time there is a financial crisis, we get affected. So I think that's something which we are not immune to. And most recently, I think the pandemic has accelerated the adoption of technology. Earlier, we used to talk in our meeting that cooperatives are behind when it comes to technology. We need to be more technology used to make advantage of technology. But now this has been thrust upon us. There is no alternative but to see how we adopt and adapt to technology. And this consultation is a very good example. In the normal sense, we might have had this in a physical setting, face to face, but now we are able to do this using an online platform where we don't have to worry about physical travel, we don't have to worry about visas and other issues. So there is ease. The technology brings in ease, but it also brings with us certain challenges. And finally, I think world peace is something which we also need to encounter. In many countries where we work, there are issues in terms of governance. Most recent example is in Myanmar, where there is a coup. We are not sure how the situation in the country is, very limited information. What is the effect which is having on cooperatives? So there are some challenges which are thrust on us, some which we know, but then there are some which are thrust on us. So how do we take these on board? And there is the sustainable development goals, which we've been talking about. So how do we ensure that, and this is important when we talk about civil society, government and other players, cooperatives are active in the sustainable development goals, but how do we make sure that we present our views? How do we make sure that the government understands the role that cooperatives are playing and in implementation, and are able to take cooperatives on board? So it's both in terms of addressing challenges which we face, but also in terms of looking at some of the current policy, current overarching priorities, and how do we fit ourselves with them. Cooperatives, I think it's not just as an enterprise, but we build social capital, we unite people, we also look at cultural issues, we look at environmental, we also concerned about the environment. I think all these are advantages which gives us, if we were to talk about our advantage, what is the advantage? I think these are the advantages which cooperatives have when compared to other players. And how do we leverage this? And this advantage which we have comes from our this statement of cooperative identity. So how do we leverage this statement of cooperative to our advantage in these current competitive times? So cooperatives, we know, can contribute to society in terms of building the social capital, bringing people at the most marginalized level together. Now we have, I think there are, when we come to cooperatives, we talked about the agriculture sector, credit, consumer, etc. But there is this whole informal economy where a lot of these services and workers are in big numbers. The services sectors was badly affected by the pandemic. Many of the workers have been badly affected by the pandemic. And many of them are in the informal sector where cooperatives have not done as much work. In some countries, a lot of work has been done, not so much in other countries. So how do we look at this whole opportunity which has opened up in the informal sector, in looking at workers' cooperative, in looking at service cooperatives? And the role of government has been talked about, that government can either help in terms of easing the way cooperatives can function, or they can hinder. So they have both positive and negative role to play. So how do we ensure that we are able to influence governments in order to create an enabling environment for cooperatives. And in an area where, in a world where we are saying where profit seems to be the most determining factor, that seems to be the top thing, and individual, both profit seeking and individual, when they are on the top, we bring about an alternative saying that no, it's not just the individual, we also need to look at a group. It's not just profit seeking, making profit, but how the profits are distributed, how the profits are made use are more important. I think these are the true points which differentiates us from others, and how do we and this is the challenge also that we have when we come to the application of the statement of cooperative identity. While these are good principles and values, what are the issues that we face when it comes to practical application, and how are we able to overcome this? I think is something which we need to look at, and I'm hopeful will come up as part of this discussion. And so what are some of the ways in which we could look at overcoming some of the challenges? One is education in terms of Principle 5. How do we make sure that the education, training, and awareness is disseminated well? Because we need to change from an individual to a collective interest, which will benefit a larger humanity. So how do we improve on cooperative education? How do we intervene in schools, colleges, and universities to promote the cooperative and what cooperatives stand for? How do we make advantage of digitization and innovation in order to ensure that we are also competitive when it comes to other players? These days, earlier the advantage which cooperatives have and had and maybe continue to have, which we tout, is the closeness that we have to people, the closeness that we have to members. But these days with digitization, anyone can get close to members through a smartphone. So how do we also use some of the innovations which are there in order to be able to overcome these challenges? How do we use the advantage of the cooperative statement of cooperative identity to attract youth, women, and marginalized sections into the cooperative fold? How do we diversify our member base so that there is new possibilities? And by diversification, it's more in terms of looking at where are the new opportunities, where are the new sectors where we can leverage on, where we don't have much of a presence to be able to bring in new cooperative. This could be with professionals. There are IT professionals, there are accounting professionals, there are other kinds of professionals where again there isn't much about cooperatives being talked about. So those are new areas to look at. Then emerging areas like health. The pandemic has shown the importance of health. So how do we get more and more into the health arena? How do we look at the demographic divide? In many countries, aging is becoming a big issue. So how do we position cooperatives there? So I think these are areas where we need to see how we can engage and how we get new generation of members in. And in all this, I think the role of the national body becomes important. ANCASA, national federations, the SNCF, all the national bodies have a very important role to play in terms of ensuring that there is safeguard. We safeguard the SCI in the national context and in engagement with the stakeholders, internal and external, about protecting the statement of cooperative identity and ensuring that cooperatives have a level playing field when compared with other businesses. And in all this, I think we have also the support of the various agencies which we can leverage upon. For example, the United Nations, the ILO recommendation is there, the Food and Agriculture Organization, IFADA, all have been good partners, advocates for the cooperatives. Similarly, recently, the European Union, which is these days one of the largest funders, they also are strong advocates for cooperatives, And the European Union looks at cooperatives both as a social and a business private enterprise. So they better understand what cooperatives are. So how do we leverage on it's not only in country, but also these external partners who are there, who are supportive of cooperatives in order to promote and advocate for cooperatives. So in summary, I think cooperation among cooperatives directs us to work collaboratively within the cooperative network. Concern for the community is important. How do we collaborate with government, development partners, and other agencies to enhance our partnership? How do we also promote member democratic control? I think that's supreme. How do we ensure it's applied in a true sense? So I think these are some of the issues, challenges, which from a global office sense, they have put forth, and they feel that we need to be looking into. And these are all these issues which will also be taken up during the Congress. So I think this is the groundwork, both for, you heard from Professor Kurimoto from an Asian perspective sense, and Om Devi's Mala's presentation touched on the global perspective. So I think with these two in place, I think it's a good time now to open up. One, to hear from each of you your observations, initial observations and initial thoughts on some of these, whatever has been presented, or what you think are some of the issues and challenges in relation to the statement of cooperative identity and its application. So we can leave the floor open. Anyone feel free to jump in. And we also have the set of 5 questions. So I'm sure in your presentation, in your thing, you will touch upon them. But in case we miss it out, we will come back to them. So I leave the floor open to hear from you all, your thoughts on the cooperatives, the statement of identity, issues and challenges.
Hello, Nasir, Malaysia.
Yes.
Can I start with a few questions first?
Sure.
To Professor Kurimoto, thank you very much for your presentation. You did mention about the age farmers from agriculture co-op who do not really want to invest more because they think their life is now very short. So what do the agriculture co-op in Japan do to overcome this problem? Because I think it's important for us to also hear your experience, because we are also having the same problem in our country, attracting investment from the age population. And another one is, you did mention that in the CIS, government should only play a role as regulator in the legal aspect. But in many countries, we know that government take part in development of co-op. So how do we come to a balance between getting involved in development and just doing regulatory function? Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Yes, for the first question on the capitalization of cooperatives, especially in agriculture cooperatives. In Japan, the farmers have invested in agriculture cooperatives very heavily. So on average, they have the share of the agriculture cooperative amounted to about nearly 1 million yen. Very high investment already they have. But the problem is that they are not willing to invest in modernizing their equipment, their machinery, etc. Because if they have very heavy investment in those facilities, they have to pay back in another 10 or 20 years. But they will retire sooner or later. So that is why they cannot invest in the agriculture with very strong intention. It is called the horizon problem in the economics. And that is the problem faced by agriculture cooperatives. So they have very strong mechanism of capitalizing cooperatives. For instance, as I have mentioned, the farmers have great amount of money put in the agriculture cooperatives, and then they have the prefectural unions, prefectural federations, credit cooperative federations, and the provincial level, and national level, they have the Norin Checking Bank, very strong bank that is one of 4 or 5 largest bank in Japan. So they have very strong power in the financial sector. However, they are lacking the place to invest because of such a problem of aging farmers. So that is why the Norin Chunki Bank had heavily invested in the US bond, American bond, or Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, such an government-supported financial institutions. So in 2008, they have had very serious loss from the financial crisis started by the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy. So in that case, they have to pay, they have to increase their capital base. Finally, they have got the loss of 1 trillion yen, but the farmers are very rich. So the agriculture cooperatives have invested to capitalize Norin Chunki Bank by nearly 2 trillion yen. So very strong capital base they have built, and they could save the Norin Chunki Bank from bankruptcy. So that is a very good thing, but at the same time, still they are facing the problem of very small opportunities to lend out money, accumulated money. So that's the problem. So that is quite different from European American cooperatives. They are lacking money, but in Japan, the agricultural cooperatives have enough money. But the problem is how to invest it. That's the problem. So in this regard, they are now making efforts to streamline all the operations to reduce the cost and to cope with the fintech, the new technologies that is now changing the whole scene of the financial markets. So in this regard, Norin Chunki Bank and Japan's JA bank system, the agricultural cooperative bank system, is facing very serious problem of how to use their accumulated money. So that is the answer to the first question. The second question, could you repeat very briefly about the second question?
To put it simply, how do you limit function of government in the development of co-op? Yes. Because in CIS, we do know that the government should only focus on regulatory or legal issues.
Yes.
Related. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. That is a very important question. Still now faced by Asian cooperatives. Because of the historical background of Asian cooperatives who had developed after the independence. But before independence, the British Empire had given the cooperative legislation to India, that is the Indian Cooperative Credit Societies Act of 1904 with very strong top-down approaches. And that top-down approach had been inherited by the newly independent states like Nehru in India or Nkrumah in Ghana. They have seen cooperatives as an engine of development because the very strong economic agents had left from the countries after independence. So only reliable economic entities are the cooperatives and small and minor enterprises. So that is why those leaders of the newly independent states had heavily relied on the cooperatives. So cooperatives had been seen and treated as engine of economic and social development. So the top-down approach of the colonial power had been inherited by the new leaders. So that is why in Asia and African countries, the government has very strong power to regulate and promote cooperatives. Of course, that was good for cooperatives in the beginning when they are lacking the money and know-how and technology, and the government had given great hand to help cooperatives. That is true. We can't neglect that. But at the same time, the time had changed or changing from such top-down approach to the more independent cooperatives. That is what the fourth principle of autonomy and independence means. So the cooperatives in Asia have to stand by its own foot to serve the interests of our members. Of course, it is very difficult, and still in Japan, the agriculture cooperatives, fishery cooperatives are still very much dependent on government assistances and government control. So in this regard, we see the Japanese agriculture and fishery cooperatives are very common with Asian cooperatives, while the consumer cooperatives in Japan and Korea, or even in Singapore, have been very independent from the government. And there is no financial subsidies from the government. So they have to build up their own capacities from the bottom. So that is why there are many national federations in consumer sector because of the ideological differences. So that is because it's quite natural, because they are bottom-up organizations, very much different from the agriculture cooperatives in Japan. That is still top-down. So I see two problems. One is the government attitude to cooperatives. They still see cooperatives as an instrument to implement their agricultural policy. And so to promote production or to restrain production, they relied on agriculture cooperatives. Without cooperatives, the government couldn't implement their agriculture policy. So still they are protecting and controlling the cooperatives to a very large extent. So that is quite large difference between the Japanese and Western cooperatives. North America or European cooperatives are very independent. And of course, they are pushing the government to give their subsidies to help the farmers, but not to cooperatives. Of course, that is quite natural that the agriculture needs the government help in case of the natural disasters, pandemics. They need the government help. That's quite natural. Even in the United States and Europe, they need such government help. But that is different from the help to the cooperatives. Cooperatives can be more independent. And so that is one part of the problem. And in some countries like India, politicians, parliaments, member of parliaments are at the same time the leaders of the cooperatives. They have very strong influence on the cooperatives. So both, not only the bureaucrats of the cooperative ministers and registrars, but also politicians are also very influential in deciding the cooperative policy. But I think they should restrain themselves only to regulate on the basis of the regulation, cooperative laws. Cooperative law stipulates that the cooperatives should be independent and autonomous. Of course, there is strong need for the partnership on the equal basis. So that is one problem. The other problem is the cooperative side. The cooperatives are still very much dependent on the government help, including Japan. So that is very different from consumer cooperatives in Japan or agriculture cooperative in the West. So, but we have to change such mindset of dependence or culture of dependence and to develop the capacity of independence and autonomy. Otherwise, they cannot develop the capability of doing business in such a very difficult time of growing competition and digital transformation is threatening cooperatives' existence now in many places. So the cooperatives should be independent to cope with such stronger, increasing competition. Otherwise, they cannot survive in a very difficult time. That is my opinion. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Professor Kurimoto. And I see that we have different, I will come back to Ankasa, but I'll go to Singapore. And on this question about government relationship and the identity, what is the experience in Singapore?
Hi, Valu. Okay, in Singapore, I guess because we have a minister, so that not many of the ministers or people in the government are really aware what exactly is cooperatives. Because in Singapore, government is the regulators, so there's a more need, and we are trying our best to reach out to these government officials so that we can then influence them into the policies that encourage the developments of cooperatives. And that will take time, as I see it in that sense. And it's very important for us in Singapore of development of cooperative. One, the need of government support and the understanding. So that will then helps to in terms of like regulations governing the cooperatives, whether it make it easier or not. For example, let's talk about campus cooperatives. Now, if a campus cooperative as schools, teachers are having regulations or that this is just what we call a secondary type of ECA for them. They will have the time and energy to actually come out cooperative for students. So that there's a need to maybe tweak certain regulations that is more in favor for the development of cooperatives. And in terms of technologies that today, as rightfully mentioned by the speakers, there's what we call, gig economy. And there are people out there, especially unemployment arises. Can they not come to form a cooperatives, like a platform cooperatives, which we have recently have one, that's called Agape Efficiency, where they did the air conditioning so-called services where people can book an aircon servicing and then their members can accept the job. And so there's this need to come out more of such a cooperatives to meet today's needs. That's what I feel. I'm not sure whether you get what I meant.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think Singapore is also your point which you mentioned, the government is the regulator, so that's a job, but then how do we influence their policy? And I think Singapore has managed to change the membership requirement given the current times.
That's because we're constantly working. So there's a more need to engage more of the officials so that they are more aware, because it's only when you understand what is cooperatives and you understand the benefits that the cooperatives actually brings to the economy, then you could then come up policies that is more conducive for cooperatives to grow and develop.
Right. Thank you for that, Patsy. Let me go to the Cooperative Institute of Malaysia. I think as an agency which is promoting, educating cooperators, how do you all see your role, the role that government plays, and both as a facilitator or inhibitor, and what has your relationship been with cooperatives, with the government, sorry?
Hello, Mr. Balu. Hi, other members. I'm Sharina. In terms of our role as training institutions, whenever we do our training curriculums and also our training programs, we do actually engage with the cooperatives. Nonetheless, from time to time, the government also has their own initiative, their own views on cooperative, and from time to time we also tailored our training programs to suit the government's needs. But the government of Malaysia actually is trying to promote cooperative and to see cooperative as tools for social economic development. And therefore, we in the Cooperative College and also the cooperative commissions, we do play part in engaging with cooperatives, engaging with other ministries, especially the youth ministries, women, also the agriculture industry ministries, and few other organizations to ensure that education is being spread as much as possible and at every level. You know that Angkasa is taking care of the educations for the cooperatives, school cooperatives. We, on the other side, are actually promoting programs, education programs for the other than school co-ops. And now we have certain targeted groups like youth, women, and also the indigenous group. So actually, we really work hand in hand. We do try to understand the needs of training for cooperative movement. Nonetheless, we really look at our stakeholder, which are the government, to see where are the directions. And we see that the government of Malaysia is actually really encouraging and really looking forward for promoting co-ops as a social engine to improve the economy of Malaysia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll come back to Angkasa now, the same question. I think similar to SNCF as the national federation, Angkasa has a direct relationship with the government. So how do you all see the relationship, placing the cooperative identity in perspective? Is it, how can governments better engage? What is the state now, and how can it be better enable that relationship based on what Professor Kurimoto also mentioned?
Thank you. I think we are one of the few countries in the world that is very lucky to have our own ministry for cooperative. At the same time, we have Cooperative Development Commission. We should applaud that. We have very clear policy on co-op because we, under the national entrepreneurship policy, co-op has been mentioned as one of the instrument for development of community. And by early or end of next week, the government is going now to expand the national entrepreneurship policy by now introducing the new cooperative transformation plan, Transcom. And the objective of this Transcom is to bring co-op into the community. At the moment, I think maybe close to 30% or 25% of the Malaysian population are members of co-op. The government has the intention of bringing the number up. So the approach of Transcom is to really make people know and understand what co-op is all about. And eventually, it will come to the impact of bringing in fairness, inclusiveness, and sustainability of the community. So I'm very glad, we are very happy as an apex of co-op that government has really set up a very good policy, very clear policy in bringing co-op into the mainstream of the country. But still there are a few problems that need to be resolved. For example, in terms of doing business, not all laws in the country under different ministries recognize co-op as a body that can take advantage or take part in the incentive given by government. To a certain extent, some banks even don't allow co-op to take loan from them simply because they are co-op and registered under different act. Because in our country, entrepreneurship, in this case, maybe small and medium industries, are actually different from cooperative societies. We are registered under different act. So to enjoy incentive from certain department that has the law or regulation that mention only small and medium industries can take advantage, in that kind of situation, then co-op will not be able to benefit from that policy. So that is a problem that you are facing at the moment, but we know government is aware about this. They are now, making steps to resolve this. Some has been resolved with certain ministries, but there are still a few other that need to be ironed out. That is one. Another issue of government involvement in co-op, if I can say that, is we are not yet being considered as one of the organizations that is contributing to the SDG. I think Mr. Balu has had the experience of meeting one of the ministry that is actually taking charge of the SDG, and they really do not pick up numbers from, let's say, for example, our contribution in bringing down the poverty, our contribution to the protection of the environment, the climate change. No, even recently when we checked, there are supposed to be a meeting soon at United Nations where countries will report their contribution to achievement of SDG, and we make a check with the particular ministry department, and they say co-op contribution is not included in that report because they don't have the data. So this is one issue, because as you know, co-op as SSE actually contributing very much to the SDG, and it is very important for us to be taken up by the government through this statistic, because if the intention is to deepen the identity of co-op in the community, then first the government will have to look and regard us as one of the community that is actually contributing to the sustainability. And in that breadth of manner also, I would like to also bring along I think this is also involve ICA and United Nations, because now United Nations is talking about SSE, right? Social Solidarity Economy, where in SSE, they are recognizing not just co-op, but other organizations which has the intention of, bringing fairness, inclusiveness, sustainability to the community, is being considered under SSE as contributors to the SDG. But in our country, co-op is not recognized, for example, as social enterprise. Not SSE, but because in our country, government has a specific plan for social enterprise. At the same time, plan or policy for cooperative organization. But for co-op to be recognized as social enterprise, you have to fulfill criteria set up by the government for you to be able to be recognized as social enterprise, which is to us, this is quite, I can't say weird, but I don't know the right word, but we know that the DNA of co-op is we are actually social enterprise. We are SSE. So that is one issue that we need to resolve. Again, this has been brought to the attention of the government. I think Co-op Institute of Malaysia also knows about this, and we will see maybe this can be resolved soon. And I think for now, sorry, and Dr. Azlan also, we have been working on this for many years. You know, we have a very strong school cooperative in our country. Almost all secondary school, they have co-op, they have established co-op. But up to now, we are not being able to bring in co-op education as part of the curriculum. So that is one ambition that I think we will carry on until we succeed, because it's very important. But in terms of government recognizing co-op as co-curriculum in the school, that is not a problem at all. We have been accepted and in fact encouraged by the ministry. They look co-op as an institution that can help the children and also the school at large. But putting cooperative education in the curriculum is still in the agenda. It's not yet been successful. So I think that's all. Thank you.
Maybe I'll develop on that point, and first I'll go to Cooperative Institute of Malaysia and then Singapore and then come back to you all. The question is, how do we, I think the Cooperative Institute of Malaysia is working on the forefront with young people. And you also mentioned, Mr. Nasir mentioned about school cooperatives and curriculum. So how do we take advantage? How do we attract young people using what we consider the statement of cooperative identity as one of our strengths? So how do you all see the young people, the youth, how attracted are they to cooperatives and these principles, and how do they find it relevant, and what is your view from the institute, because you all deal directly with young people? And then after that, I'll then request Patsy to talk about her experience in Singapore, and then we can come back to Malaysia on that. So the Cooperative Institute.
With regards to our engagement with youth, the young peoples, actually it is more to the promotions of co-op and cooperative as a way of doing business. So it's actually, we are at the enculturation stages. So our aim is to promote, and we want a continuity from school co-ops to university. And after finishing their studies in the university, they will continue in setting up co-ops and choose co-ops as a business apart from other types of organizations. Yeah, so we do a few programs, engagement seminars. We do also encourage what we call rejuvenations of co-ops. So there are co-op among the youth that has been set up, and now we try to revive the co-op with our intervention programs. So there are 4 stages that we have discussed with the ministry, and from time to time we engage with ministry in conducting the program. But I must say that it is a very long way to go, and many youth is actually, they are more exposed to entrepreneurs, they are more exposed to MNCs and all that. It's a challenge, but we do conduct programs, and I say there's many works has to be done for us to really instill this cooperative identity and also the spirit of cooperative among the youth.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a very important point which you mentioned about the continuity. It can't just be left at schools, but how do we make sure that from schools it goes to the universities? And again, just not left at the university, but then how do you take it when you're going to work or when you're starting something? So I think if you can build that continuity, it'll go a long way. And I'm glad to hear that that's something which you all are planning. Patsy, in Singapore, how's the experience with youth? How easy is it to attract? What are your challenges there?
Okay, Singapore is not that easy to attract youth, because today youth are actually what we call overwhelmed with information, or that what we do, we try is to cultivate in them the mindset that cooperative is also sexier, it's also a sexy business model. It's a model that you can do good and do well as well. And it's also a model that encourages entrepreneurship. So what we actually did, we start from like secondary schools, forming a cook clubs, where we teach them business skill sets, entrepreneurial, and with the objective of, of contributing to a greater society. From there, from the secondary school to the IHL, by IHL we meet the universities, the polytechnics. We do guest lecture, teaching them and giving them as an opportunity to know more about cooperatives, so that should they one day step out of the workforce, they could consider cooperative as an alternative to self-proprietary or even your private enterprises itself. And we do it through activities which try to make them, interested. One of them is to create-on, or similarly what I call a hackathon, where they structure them in the group of 5 people, which is how you need to form a cooperatives, and come up ideas that is sustainable, and how these ideas can then do good to the society. And we also try to provide seeding fund. So in other words, if you form a cooperative, like this year we are created by Urban Origins, which are a group of social entrepreneurs that get together and think about food sustainability. So I'm working with them very closely to actualize their ideas by forming a cooperative. We are working on that. And another way that is other activities that we had to attract youth, especially in the social media space. Youth need to know basically what is cooperative, what is it different from a social enterprise, for example. We are different from a charity or even a business. Like a social enterprise, we are with a social good and doing sustainable stuff. But the difference between social enterprise versus a cooperative is that cooperatives are actually membership based. A social enterprise could be a private limited company in that basis. So we need to give them more, widen their horizon. So we try to, in the social media, come out new ways that they could be, stop and look at it and give maybe a thinker, and maybe thinking cooperative could be one of the ways they could consider if they come up to the workforce. That is our experience. We are slowly, gradually, and you can see from some of the new co-ops have been formed this year. Well, like Urban Origin, most of them are in their 20s. So we are trying our best to get this group of people which are ready for the workforce to think of cooperatives as a business model, especially in today's economy where employment rates are affected with a lot of companies retrenching, and they could, think of a cooperative. That's our experience.
Thank you, Patsy. I think the 2 creathons which you all have conducted, I think they are very pretty exciting way and interesting way to bring in new people. And I hope that it's good to hear that the award winners are now being supported to form cooperatives. I think once we can able to help them set up and start, that itself can be a model which we can use to take to other youth to say, look, these people have done it, you all can also do it. And from the ICA, we have had coopathons. We have had 3 coopathons where again, that's a platform which we are, for again, youth want to see how you can use technology, how you can do things on the online. So we find that coopathons are an interesting way. And even the ICA Global has recently supported the replication projects across different regions in the Asia Pacific region. 2 cooperatives, one from Indonesia and one from Philippines, have been supported. So I think these are all initiatives which we need to, the word which you used is, how do we actualize it rather than just talk? How do we actually do things will make it more important, will be important for getting young people in. Maybe a quick thing to Ankasa in terms of how you all are looking at youth and trying to bring them. I think last year at this time, we had the Global Youth Forum in Kuching in Malaysia, how things have changed in 1 year. And this week, the GYF is being done online, and I'm sure people from Malaysia are participating in that. But what is Ankasa and the perspective from Malaysia in being able to attract youth using the cooperatives and the statement of identity.
Okay, on behalf of the president and the deputy president and the vice president, I think not much has changed since the last seminar in Mani Hotel in Johor Bahru. We are still focusing on program developing the school co-op, university cooperative, as you may have known. We have quite a number of university co-op. They have their own federation. For university co-op in Malaysia, they are called co-siswa. The members are all the university students. That's quite a number. And the issue is still, once they left university, whether or not they will join the regular cooperative. That remains as an issue, but we have still discussed on this. We have some ideas, but it's not fair for me to share here because it's still in the discussion. But actually, what we intend to do is, why not the regular adult co-op take university students as their apprentice or as their affiliate members, so that once they leave university, automatically they already have a co-op that they can join. So that is one of the plan that we are doing at the moment. But on a higher level, on the policy level, I think we are glad that the government has amended the Cooperative Act to make it easier for people to form co-op. Previously, under the previous act, 50 people is needed to form a co-op. But with the new act approved by the Parliament end of last year, now 20 people can form a co-op, and with special permission from the Cooperative Commission, I think up to 5 people now, if I'm not mistaken, maybe college can confirm with me, can form a co-op. So by doing this, the government intention is very clear to make it easy for people to set co-op. And in this case, we hope that it will be more attractive for the youth to form co-op, because now they don't need to, group together 50 people, maybe 5 to 10 people, they can start a co-op. So instead of forming business under company commission as startup, now they can form co-op as startup, and they can take benefit of all those crowdfunding and everything you have once you form a cooperative organization. And at the same time also, Angkasa is working with one university, the University of Malaysia Kelantan, to make a study on the impact of co-op in the country, and also how do we bring youth and women into the movement. But another thing that I need to share, and maybe I would like to put this question to SCA and the rest of the group also. We are celebrating our 100 years of cooperative formation in the country, because we were first born in 1922. So by next year, it will be our 100 years existence. But still, as far as economic contribution is concerned, we have been seen as an infant, because contribution to the GDP at the moment is less than 3%. So that has been used as a parameter to evaluate co-op contribution of either co-op is still relevant or important to the community. But of course, as you know, co-op contribution cannot be just measured by the economic outcome. We have social and also culture that we need to take into consideration. So can ICA come up with a standard measurement? How do you actually measure co-op contribution to the community? Just not look into the economy, but other parts, because up to now, there have been discussion for quite a number of years, but we still haven't come up with a very concrete measurement. The government still, when talking about co-op, they say you are a sleeping giant. your contribution is only 2%, you can go to 10 or 15% or more. So how do we resolve this issue so that the government has confidence in co-op movement? Thank you.
Right. Thank you for that. And I'm glad Professor Kurimoto is here. So I will direct him to, based on, I think this is, I'm sure, a question which in many countries have been trying to look at in terms of contribution, not just looking at economic, but how do we look at the social and things. So what is the experience and what is it? Is there something which you think we could, the ICA could be doing? If not the ICA, at a regional level, is there something that we could take up with some of our member countries?
Could you repeat your question?
No, the question was, Mr. Nasir had asked about how do we measure the contribution of cooperatives to countries, to a country, in a country. And right now, when we talk about contribution, it's much more in economic sense, saying that this percentage of the economy. So it's a very economic calculation which is done. But that is limiting, given that we have there is a social dimension to it. There is a cultural dimension to it. These are intangibles, which cultural at least is an intangible, difficult to capture, but then social could be much better captured. But the question is, how do we have a more comprehensive way to capture the contribution of cooperatives to a national economy? And in economy, I don't mean not just in an economic sense. So has there been an initiative across different countries? What has been your experience? And two is that something that we could do, take up as a project, as a research thing in the Asia Pacific region to do study in 1 or 2 countries in terms of how we can contribute? And this question also came up when we had the regional assembly last month. There was questions raised from Sri Lanka and a few other members in terms of, is there a way in which we can capture the contribution in all its dimensions so that it makes it much more easier for us to be able to say how cooperatives are making a difference?
Okay, I shall answer to your question in 2 ways. One is how to calculate the contribution of the cooperatives to the SDGs. As you may know that the Japanese consumer cooperatives had won the government's SDGs award in these 3 years. First year, the Metropolitan Consumer Cooperative Federation. Second year, the Japanese Consumers Cooperative Union. Third year, the last year, agricultural cooperatives in Fukushima had won the government's award for the implementation of SDGs. So in this regard, cooperatives' efforts to implement the SDGs is being recognized by the government. That is a good thing. And we have to develop the criteria to evaluate the contribution of cooperatives towards the SDGs. In this regard, there are many projects now going on. For instance, in Canada, the evaluation criteria is being developed in these 2-3 years, but not yet finished. And ICMIF, International Cooperative and Mutual Federation, ICMIF, is now developing the SDGs calculator to gauge the achievements of cooperatives and mutuals in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United States. But that is still in the pipeline, not yet finished. But we have to develop such a tool for gauging the results or achievements of the cooperatives. And on the other way, we have to discuss about the criteria to evaluate the economic impact, but also we have to develop the impact to the cultural, social and cultural impact to the development. In this regard, we are still facing the problems because many of such an measurement is done only through the economic impact. So for instance, ROI, return on investment, return on assets, or return on equity, all these return is calculated on the financial or economic basis. But there is a discussion on the social return on investment, SROI. But that is developed by the social enterprises or non-profit sector. But there are many criticisms about that because that is also very much inclined to the economic calculation, economic considerations, because only the factors that can be calculated in the economic term can be evaluated. So the social impact or social, for instance, social commitment or social linkage, social capital, those factors are not necessarily covered by these new evaluation tool, such as SROI, social return on investment. So this is what we are facing to develop the new evaluation criteria that covers not only economic aspects, but also social and cultural aspects of development. So that is still, we are struggling to develop such new criteria. So I can't say the definite things. That is only in the pipeline.
That's an area to look at. So in Singapore, is there, are you all looking at contribution of cooperatives to the economy in different sense?
In terms of our contribution of the economy from cooperatives in Singapore is quite low in that sense. And because in Singapore, we don't put, I mean, all the cooperatives in Singapore don't actually pay the income tax, they pay to the cooperative tax. So it is very hard to gauge in terms of the GDP that we actually contribute to. We are actually calculating on our own, but it is very, very low.
Okay. But does the Cooperative Institute of Malaysia, can it help in terms of trying to come up with some way to measure contribution?
Discussions, but no, we do agree with suggestions that we should not only limit our focus on the dollars and cents, and we should include more on the social aspects of contributions. But up to now, many of our focus is still on the financial, and we have not come up with one measurements or tools that can be used to measure the social contributions. But we do recognize there are some studies done on it. Yes, thank you, Mr. Balu.
Okay, I think that's something to area to look at. I know I'm conscious about time. We have around 5 to 10 minutes. So can I just, and I see that Patsy had to leave. So in light of the current, so this question is again to everyone, please feel free to add. In light of this current situation, the global challenges that we are facing with the COVID pandemic, the increasing competition from different sources, climate change, what do you all think about cooperatives, and how can we move forward in addressing some of these global challenges in front of us? And does the statement of cooperative identity stand in good, is it something that we can use to the advantage in order to be able to address some of these challenges?
Maybe ICA should answer first. I think theoretically there is nothing wrong with the co-op principle, co-op philosophy, co-op ideas, that we are actually the best in Angkasa. We have concluded our plan up to 2050, but we go by segment by segment, the first Angkasa plan, second and third, and so on. So up to 2030, our theme is what has been famously used by ICA, co-op as the best way of doing business. So by 2030, we want those people who want to set up business, they should look at co-op first before they form another kind of business organization. So that has been our intention embedded in our strategic plan. But as I said earlier, and was mentioned by Patsy, it's not just the theory or the planning, but the actualization, whether people can see example that this is happening, that they can emulate that. Otherwise, people will still have a second thought about forming a co-op. So in that sense, it's very important for us to go to the ground and make people understand what co-op is all about. And we have to show good example. And at the moment, as ICA knows, stories about success of co-op is not in the mainstream media. Maybe you have to look up in the internet, you go to ICA website, you can see those stories, but not in the mainstream media. Maybe we have to think of something about that. We have to tell the good stories to the public for them to be able to appreciate cooperative organization. Thank you.
I see Dato Sahadevan is here. Do you have any points to add on this whole statement of cooperative identity and how NLFS views some of these? What are the challenges, opportunities, etc.?
Yeah, sorry, there's a technical glitch here all the time. Well, the first thing is the pandemic and what has happened to the cooperatives in this country and also the whole world. I was just trying to understand in terms of the cooperative, the government has all over the globe has given big chunks of their GDP just to sustain this period, meaning assistance has gone out to the people at stake, and the whole citizens have been given a lot of help. Now, what kind of help did the cooperatives get on a global basis? And this question is also relevant to Malaysia. I'm sure Angkasa has been working with the government, and even the cooperative department here, the cooperative commission, they have asked what kind of impact the pandemic had on us, on all the cooperatives, including analysis. So all cooperatives, they did a questionnaire, and they did understand the impact it had. So my question was, on a global basis, this is a global problem. All countries are doling out this kind of budgets, especially for this. And what is the experience, especially maybe in India, how cooperatives are benefited? In the other ASEAN countries, how cooperatives are benefited by the government intervention during this pandemic? Our impact and what has happened. That's one. Number two, the question of government. Government is always has a role in cooperative development. Our speaker from the research chairman, his speech, he talked about the top-down approach in government in the 90s and when the development phase of cooperatives in the country. But as time goes on, I think even last year did our GM Ankasa, he did ask the same question. What would be the role of cooperatives, the government vis-a-vis cooperative? I suppose that question, the evolution has to come in terms of, from top-down approach. Maybe they should give more autonomy to the cooperatives to function. I suppose that's something we'll have to see what the global experience is and then maybe take a leaf from that. Just that, this is just my little observation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I think just to quickly answer both the questions. On the first question, I would look at it in three pockets. One, because the impact and the response have been at those three levels. One is agriculture, and with people under lockdown, staying at home, not able to think. It was the agriculture cooperatives and the consumer cooperatives which were operational. In most countries, when you look at it, the farmers were going and working and producing and things. So they didn't stop. The farmers didn't stay at home. So I think the importance of agriculture and its contribution was highlighted. And within this, I think the role of cooperatives also highlighted in many countries. But here what's happening is, I think the effort, and in many countries, India in particular has seen that the link between the producer and the consumer, where the producer gets very little for his produce and the consumer pays very high for the produce. So in between, the middleman takes away a big chunk. So how do we connect the producer and the consumer? So the farm laws, the recent farm laws have been introduced, though there is a lot of controversy around that. But the essence of that is to say, how do we add value? How do farmers add value? How do we create the necessary infrastructure where farmers are able to not just sell their primary produce, but able to produce, aggregate, and then have a mechanism with which they can negotiate with the private. So contract farming, adding infrastructure, getting contract farming, opening up markets. I think that sense, I see that it's the determination of the government in India, and I'm sure in many other countries like Vietnam, I know they are trying to see how they can link. So that's one area I think where cooperatives need to step in and see how we play that role of the benevolent intermediary. Intermediaries will always be needed, but then I think cooperatives have a good thing because the agriculture cooperatives are there, the consumer cooperatives are there, the credit cooperatives are there. So how do we make sure that we can integrate them together? So that's one. The second is on the credit cooperatives. I think in many countries, again, governments made sure that loan repayments were deferred, because there's no income coming in. So how do you ensure that there is no burden on people to pay immediately? So many credit cooperatives, many banking cooperatives had also to follow those regulations. Many of them voluntarily made sure that the moratorium, the interest, etc., were taken into account. But finance cooperatives, credit cooperatives are facing big challenges because these days you have internet banking, you have these small banks, you have other types of fintech companies coming in, which are making it much more easier for the consumer to directly reach members. Earlier, our strength was that we were closest to the members. Members had trust in us. They were willing to park their money. They were willing to transact with us. We still have that big advantage of trust, but then we need to ensure that technology, we make it much more easier to engage. So I think consumer credit cooperatives need to be looking at that. And the third is the non-financial, non-agriculture. And I think that's where there is a lot more work which cooperatives need to do. For in many countries, the government gave subsidies for the small and medium enterprises, for the informal economy, for the services sector, for businesses, where again, cooperatives are not there in big numbers. So it was not really possible. And in some countries, like for example, in India, are cooperatives considered as SMEs, small and medium enterprises, or are they different? Where in the Philippines, cooperatives are considered as small and medium enterprises, but not in India. Same as in other countries. So the government gives out the money for, say, private, but then are really cooperatives considered private enterprises? I think that's been one of the challenges in many countries. For in Australia, the BCCM, which is the apex body, they played a very active role in engaging with the government, in informing their members, in helping them to access these loans. Same thing happened in Canada. So I think there is the impact of pandemic on cooperatives has been varied by sectors, by countries, but in all, I think there have been many initiatives to see how some of these support from the government could be leveraged, not only at the during this crisis, but going forward, how do we continue to do that? And I think the role of government is going to continue, whether it could be top down in some areas, it could be bottom up in other places. But once I think that the government, once there is a structure in place, it's very difficult to get them to change it very overnight. But where I think the opportunity lies, there are new areas where cooperatives can come in. For example, in the services sector, there is Patsy had mentioned about air conditioning repairmen coming together. And Mr. Nasir and I have talked also that in Malaysia, you have these technical schools which train people in air conditioner and other vocations. Why not get cooperatives, these trained people to form cooperatives and be able to not only run their business, but run it as a cooperative. So these opportunities are there. And these need not depend directly. Yes, government can support, but it need not be in the same way that it is done in the past. So there is this opportunity to break away from this top-down model. And that's what Professor Kurimoto had also mentioned, that in the newer forms, it can be self-help, self-generated. And in many cooperatives, I think in many countries, he mentioned about Japan, many cooperatives are sitting with money. They don't know where to invest. Even if you invest in the government fixed deposit, you get a very low interest rate. You don't get, or in some cases, it's negative. So the money is there. So how do we, when we are forming these new cooperatives, when we are talking about youth, how do we use the money which is within the system to be able to develop rather than depend that government is going to step in? It's also again going to be a top-down approach. So I think that's one way which national apex organizations, I think, have a big role to see how we can support new enterprises with money within the system and be able to see that they are also able to then actively compete with the private players who are coming in. So that's my view on both your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Balu. Thank you.
So I think we've reached the 2 hours plus. So if anyone has any final thoughts, final words, this is a good opportunity. If someone would like to say something, I'd welcome you all to make your remarks, and then we can bring this meeting to a close. Any final words, comments from anyone? Dato Fatah, any words?
Hello. Thank you and congratulations for this initiative to call all the cooperatives, especially leader in ASEAN country, to give the idea how to encourage how to strengthen the cooperative movement. Thank you. The good initiative.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Azlan, any thoughts, any words from you?
Thank you, Mr. Balu, for your initiative. So regarding for the statement of incentive identity CSI. So in my opinion, as Nasir said, there is no problem with the 7 principles. But in Malaysia, based on Malaysia experience and a few countries in ASEAN, I observed the only problem is how we want to translate the principle into practice. And then even in Malaysia, we cannot translate yet the true principle of cooperative into practice. Then how we want to practice this principle and become a culture. So that's why we still cannot convince some areas like curriculum to the governments, the equality between cooperative and SME. That's all. I think there is Angkasa keep on going to fight for this. And thank you, Mr. Balu, for these efforts.
Okay. Anyone else?
I take this opportunity to say something or to recap about the topics. Okay, as far as CIM concerned, as a training institution and the number 5 principal education, training and information for CIM, we are trying to set up or trying to meet or trying to facilitate our students with the latest technology, so that we hope that we can reach them. We have more students, and at the same time we hope also this CSI statement of cooperative we can deliver it to them. And then, of course, as you've been aware, we have already set up one of our technology lab, the Techno Lab in CIM. So this will help CIM to boost its training facility. And then with the new norms, with the pandemic, new norm of teaching been already we have gone through. For example, last year our training more on online, and very encouraging. We have reached about 100,000 students. We deliver our lecture or our online program, and of course, there are a challenge and issue toward our courses we conducted. For example, definitely there will be a barrier, there will be a limitation that possibly in rural area we are unable to reach these cooperative members. Maybe things like this we have to look together. And then finally, about the training, the impact of the training, the outcome of the training is something that it's about time we have to emphasize. I think that's about the deepening the cooperative identity, CSI of Asia Pacific region in the CIM perspective. And then, Mr. Balu, I also like to suggest maybe in the future, when we organize this webinar, maybe we have the topic that we can look through is about the criteria to measure the dimension of GDP in cooperative in the perspective of ICA. So I think it's about time that we have to come up some model of how to capture the GDP, the measurement of the GDP. Thank you, Mr. Balu.
Okay, thank you everyone. I think definitely thank you for your participation. It's been very, very enriching listening to your experiences, thoughts. It definitely has given us input in terms of the issues and how we can move forward. And on the last point, I think we have the resources. We will have a conversation with our research committee. Professor Kurimoto is here as the chair. And we have definitely all the institutes, universities, colleges, which teach statistics, which teach research. So I think we have the technical wherewithal available with us. So it'll be good. We will, from the ICA and the research committee, plan and set up a meeting to bring together some of the experts and see how we can go about this. For you all know, the ICA brings out the World Cooperative Monitor, which ranks the top 300 cooperatives in the world. But then I think we can do something with the Asia Pacific, which is not just measuring in terms of turnover, but then some of the indicators which we've talked about, we could see how we can go about doing it. But then it's, I think doing this is not a one time, it's a process. So we need to have some database. We need to have a baseline. The question is, do we have a baseline at this point in time? What is the baseline that we need to set up? And then how do we measure it year over year? So for me, contribution to the economy is not something which we can measure overnight. It's a process. So maybe if we start with some baseline in place and get that information year over year, maybe in 3 to 5 years time, we will be in a much better position to be able to show what kind of contributions are there. But this is something which is important, and I'm sure we can see how we can take this forward. So let me bring this consultation to a close. First off, thank Professor Kurimoto for staying with us, for making your presentation, for responding to the questions. It's, I think, for us, indeed a privilege to have you and join us in this. So thank you very much for your time. And of course, thank you all, Mr. Nasir, for one, and Dato Fatah as through ACO, bringing, informing members and bringing a few of them to this table, and also providing your input. I think it's very, very important, the things that you all are doing there, especially looking at the where cooperatives are situated in Malaysia as part of the Ministry of Entrepreneurship. And that's where I think we talk about entrepreneurship and how we get more people engaged. So it's situated in a very important ministry. And so how do we leverage that? So, and thank you for all the work that you all are doing and what you've shared. Dato Sahadevan, thank you very much for joining us. It was good to hear your perspective and your views. And the Cooperative Institute of Malaysia, thank you very much. I think as an institute for training and education, you all play, for me, the most important role in terms of trying to reach out to younger people. And thank you for all your work. Thank you, Dato Kamaruddin Ismail, for joining us. Dr. Azlan, and I might be missing a few names. Patsy left, I thank her. So with that, I think I'll bring this consultation to a close. Once again, thank you very much for joining us. And of course, I'm missing Dr. Rahman. Thank you also. I think you're traveling somewhere, but thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, everyone. And have a good day, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you
and
very
again,
much.
Congratulations to Amkasa on your 50th anniversary. I'm sure you all must be having a lot of celebrations in place. And it'll continue next year. It'll be 100 years of cooperative movement. So looking forward to hearing about all these celebrations. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Did we get some screenshots? Oh. Okay.
Only the three of us?
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and
thank you, brother.
see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, Mr. Nasir, thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.